who wants to kick it off as far as today's topic?
I'll leave it to Caroline since this is her specialty.
Okay, there you go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Caroline Powell from Sellers Fi. I'm the Director of Marketing Relationships and Community, which basically just means that I have a little part in anything that is people-facing, that isn't necessarily customer service. But at Sellers Fi, we focus in funding and financial solutions for e-commerce businesses. Most of our customer base does consist of Amazon sellers. And so today, what we're talking about is really innovative ways to use funding at every stage of your business. And we've kind of chunked it out to, beginner, intermediate, and then a more advanced or well-known brand. But there are funding options all across the board. And we have some case studies that we'll talk about, as well as a few different strategies. And of course, answer your questions as we go. So I'll hand it off to Patrick.
Awesome.
My name is Patrick Donlin. I'm the Chief Brand Officer at Canopy Management. We're a full service Amazon agency, and we have we've run advertising and back office integration for all of these types of companies that Caroline just mentioned, those startups all the way through aggressive growth phases, and then finally into sort of more established enterprise brands as well. And so we've been involved in prepping companies for these financing options. And then prior to running Canopy, I myself got involved in Amazon by packaging companies to be acquired, or acquiring companies myself. So I've been on both sides of the table.
All right, very good. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Carolyn. So for those of you who are not familiar with me, I am Brian Johnson. I co-founded Canopy, same company that Patrick works at, and been in e-commerce space for about 15 years, in the Amazon space for the last 8. And so yeah, I'll just keep it at that. I've been through the trenches, so to speak. I think each of us have, for sure. So let's talk about a little bit as far as like the oops, hold on here. We got a little bit of a management issue here. Hold on here. I think hold on. There we go. Okay. So the topic today is certainly, as far as like some of the finance options. Can I just jump right into the questions that I've got, or do you want to lead with a little bit more structure, Carolyn?
No, let's jump in. Let's go for it. Okay.
So the questions that I was curious about is, I'm looking at it from like, there's different stages of selling on Amazon, whether I am I've been in the startup, I've got brands that are in startup mode. I've got others that are in growth mode. I certainly have worked with thousands of brands that are well established as well. And so all of those different stages introduce unique challenges, usually having to do with cash flow and trying to grow a brand, and trying to continue to build up the portfolio of products. And so some of the needs that I know that I've run into in the past, that I know a lot of people do, a lot of brand owners do, is things as far as like, okay, how do I get to the inventory that I need actually to the warehouse? Certainly that was a bigger challenge when it came to some of the logistical problems, especially as expensive it was. I had some shipments that I couldn't even afford to get shipped over during COVID because it just got ridiculous. It just didn't make sense. And so that has gotten a lot better, but at the same time, I feel like I have to move a lot faster as far as bringing to market a product. And sometimes that means I have to make choices as like, okay, I need to get funding, or I need to have some kind of cash now in order to get stock produced ahead of somebody else, maybe shipped over at a faster rate, get it in here so that I can actually promote it properly. That is just one example of many that occur from a product startup, from a brand startup, gets a little more complex, where maybe there's more investments in systems or people or logistics, design. Certainly a lot of things that I see a lot more of these days is compliance, right? Of trying to get products tested for safety, qualifications. So cost of doing business, but who pays for it and when? So ideally, I want to be able to move at the pace that I want to move, but sometimes I just don't have the cash flow in order to do that. So my question that all was leading up to is, if I am a startup or a relative startup, or maybe I'm just kind of like, I've got products that are startup within my brand, what are some of my options when it comes to financing or getting some kind of funding to help me move forward so I don't get stuck?
Yeah, that is a great question. Recently, we've attended events. Earlier this year, we were at Prosper talking with sellers in that same kind of situation. We just got back from ASD earlier in August. Again, talking to sellers in that kind of predicament. And there are a few different options that you can go with. One of our most popular products is our working capital product, available via term loans or lines of credit. Which basically just gives you access to the capital that you need. So if you do need to place that order, if you need a little extra cash flow because your logistics have gotten more expensive, it gives you that opportunity. We also just launched a new product yesterday that we're super excited about, called Invoice Flex, that gives sellers the opportunity to extend their terms. So as you're placing an order, you might have the opportunity to increase the volume of your order, which might put you ahead of some of the other people in line, so that you can get your products faster. But we can then pay your invoice for you, and you can extend your terms with us, because usually it's net 60, maybe net 90 to get your supply, but we can extend that up to as many as 6 months, which
So
really
it's kind of
helps.
like you're just saying like, okay, instead of having to collect the money first and then pay it to a supplier, you're acting more as an intermediary. It's like you're going to just solve this. It's
Yep.
I wouldn't call it a God, I'm going to draw a blank on it. As far as like that intermediary that holds money between the two parties, is it more of a case where you're giving the funding immediately, or you're holding the funding to the supplier until some agreement is met? I mean,
We can pay the supplier directly and upfront so that your invoice is paid in full, and then you will just pay the value of the invoice back to us over those extended terms. So it helps keep your
okay.
cash in pocket instead of, being out $20,000 today, you're out $5,000 over the course of 4 months.
Does that work, Caroline, with offshore manufacturers as well?
We can definitely do that. That kind of coincides with one of our other products. Nice little segue there, called Digital Wallet, which gives you the opportunity to both pay and receive in multiple international currencies, which is another selling point as you're doing business and finding suppliers overseas, that you can actually pay them in their national currency instead
Right.
of them having to deal with those currency conversions on their end. So it makes it a
Right.
little bit sweeter.
I think having the ability to give the float, because a lot of the offshore manufacturers want 25 to 50% down before they begin the process. So this is definitely a way to get that moving more quickly. The old school ways, Brian, as you know, I'm sure, because you're an old school Amazon guy, it's going to be credit cards, friends
Sell
and
my
family.
truck.
Yeah, that's that.
Tell my kids they're not going to college. Those.
I still have we still have people, we send them to conferences at Canopy, and they want to put the plane fares on their own credit cards so they get the miles. So there are some benefits to putting things on the credit cards if the turnover is quick.
Right.
But you can get the points and the miles. There's no collateral required when you do credit cards, but of course everything's on your credit history from there on in. So you have to be really careful, but there's a ton of different cards you can, if you are in that small range, obviously, there's a ton of different cards that you can get different interest rates, fees, and then rewards. Obviously, if you do have good credit, you can get pretty low credit card interest rates from some decent banks if you're willing to jump through the hoops and not just do the online applications.
Now,
But in the end, it's usually going to be higher interest rates than traditional financing.
right. Yeah. Especially these days, I would think, for sure. I
And
know
you
that some of the discussion that we had in the last webinar with Tim Jordan, we were talking more as far like some of the risks and the dangers of who's legitimate out there and who's not, and some of the kind of the warning signs, which I thought was great because if I'm going after financing and say, okay, what do I need? I can't just like take the first offer that comes at me because it's probably not a good deal. And certainly that was highlighted last time. So the I guess kind of reiterate some of the things we were talking about from last time when it comes to some of these financing options, whether it is, I would say that these are probably going to be more for, not only the startup, but also for growth. In other words, it's kind of like there's multiple times in the life cycle of a brand or a product where you got to pull in some additional funding. You've got to retool or repackage or remarket or market off Amazon as an example, which is getting a lot more popular these days. So some of the, what are like on those, some of the financing options that both of you have just listed, what are some advantages or disadvantages that we need to keep in mind for each of those? Like, what are some of you really need to be careful of this, or this is probably going to give you the best bang for the buck, if you will, the best leverage?
Well, like credit cards, anything where you're going to have high interest rates, you're going to have a short cycle on the debt buildup. You're probably not going to want to do equipment financing, new launch financing, those kind of things,
right,
unless it's really small.
And that's primarily because your payback is extended, right? Your payback might be a year out. You don't want to carry that high interest rate and the fees that go along with that for a year, right?
Right. But if you have something that's big, like some kind of fixed asset, you're doing an improvement on your factory, your self-manufacture or something like that, there are traditional lending facilities that you can go after, like SBA and like a traditional, like a 504 loans out of SBA will, when you're going to buy a building, you're going to buy real estate, you're going to buy equipment that's associated with a business.
Now, is a 504 specific for depreciating assets?
It's for fixed assets.
Fixed assets. Okay.
So they're not going to.
So if I want to buy a Porsche, for instance, then I can do that.
That is a depreciating fixed asset.
That's a highly depreciated asset.
But not for inventory, not for spec. They're going to want something, that if you drop it on your foot, it hurts. It's going to have some value to it. But there are, for expansion, you can, staying in SBA, sort of traditional level, they have microloans, which you can go to the SBA website. There's just hundreds of local regional banks that'll do smaller loans. But SBA is, it is a traditional loan facility. You're dealing with banks. You're not really going to SBA. They just qualify for SBA. You've probably seen this sometimes on a business listing that it's pre-qualified for SBA.
Now, is that where the SBA is kind of providing kind of like an assurance or insurance?
They're a guarantor.
They're the guarantor. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
They're a guarantor. SBA has sort of a list of requirements that the borrower needs to meet, and as long as they meet those, the SBA sort of takes that risk off the bank's hands. The banks really are there for the management fees, etc. The money is the SBA's.
Would that be, I'm probably gonna get back, it depends, but would that be your go-to from a funding source?
You really need, I mean, they've gotten looser with their lending practices, but you really need an established business at that point. That's sort of the end of the the life cycle of a company, so to speak, not in that growth phase. They're not going to give you inventory money, those kind of things.
Well, and of course, they don't have context. So depending on how many qualifications, what kind of justification you need to get that kind of guarantee from SBA, for instance, they don't have the context of the industry that may become more problematic, more paperwork, right?
I think
Something like SellersFi would obviously, they already know the industry very well, and so they understand the rules. Now, I'm guessing, Carolyn, is that the SellersFi is going to have more strict requirements because you already know what works and what doesn't.
We do. So for starters, generally we look at businesses that have been in business for at least 6 months and are doing anywhere from 10 to 20K in monthly sales, just to show that kind of sales history. Of course, everyone's going to be risk averse to hand over $50,000 to a business that says, I want to sell a garlic press.
Right.
When, that's the Amazon of 5 years ago, not the Amazon of today. So we do have those. And then of course, we're going to look at a few other things within your business, but as a whole, we aren't necessarily category specific. We work with businesses all across the space, selling a variety of products. There are some who are, for lack of a better term, conglomerates of products. They have electronics, they have apparel, they have shoes, they have everything within their catalog.
Right.
And so it's just about finding that fit, that business sense, and that, that sales history to show that they know what they're doing.
Okay. I remember in my teens and 20s, always looking at literally having to put together entire business plans, like 60-page business plans in order to convince somebody that I was, credit worthy, and it never worked.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
I think there's a big benefit, getting back to your original point, Brian, to dealing with somebody that you don't have to teach Amazon to. Right. It's a definite advantage because you're quickening that pace. You go to a traditional lender, you sit down in front of your local regional banker, they're going to have a hard time understanding the Amazon part of the e-commerce business or the business as a whole.
Right.
It does sound like, Caroline, SellersFi is in that space that's a little bit below where Amazon itself, everybody who sells on Amazon gets those emails. We'll lend you X dollars, right? But that, I think, is a 12-month. You have to be in business for 12 months. And I think they just lowered it to 100 grand, but it used to be 200,000 in annual sales.
Sorry, that's Amazon or that's SellersFi?
That's Amazon. So SellersFi is a little bit under that. So if you're just under Amazon's, the SellersFi is definitely a place to look to.
Carolyn, is that something that you can speak to me on as far as the where do I need to be before I reach out to SellersFi? In other words, as far as what my needs are, what are a couple of qualifications? Is that something you can speak to publicly, if you will, as far as who's ideal that should go see SellersFi based off of these, you should have this amount of inventory, this amount of history, or need this amount of money. Where do I need to be at in order to come to you?
Yeah, so we have that 6-month sales history, the 10 to 20K of monthly sales. And then beyond that, we aren't necessarily looking at your volume of inventory. We have no restrictions on how you use your funds. So we just want to see that sales history, liquidity of a few things. As for an ideal customer, I mean, we're talking about all of the different stages of business. So it's the worst answer, but it really does depend on who is ideal. But I would say find a funding partner, whether it's SellersFi, Amazon Lending, or anyone else. Find one before you need one, because we've run into so many clients that have the opportunity to do, for example, we've had 2 clients, I think, within the last few months come to us with a wholesale opportunity that they needed cash fast to be able to produce the inventory to be in stores for certain things. They also have an online presence.
Right. Like a Costco buy or something.
Yeah, they had the
Yeah.
opportunity to go in store. And if they had to spend the time shopping around and trying to find a funding partner that they got along with, that they trusted, they could have lost out on that business.
Well, and a
So
lot of,
find someone before you need them.
that actually makes a lot of sense, because I know that anytime I go into some kind of seeking any kind of lending personally and professionally, I always find out that I don't have the right paperwork together, right? And so there's delay, there's drag, and sometimes, like I'm sitting here like on a Friday night going like, oh, I need this paperwork right away. Oh, the person that I would get this from is not available until Monday morning. So I completely, I understand why, as far as why you're saying, like, figure it out well ahead of time before you actually need it, to make sure that you have that option and you have the paperwork and the track record ready to go, that you can actually demonstrate that.
One
I
of the
get the
things that,
sense,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I
One
get
of
the sense that Sellers Fi is less ideal for a startup brand, maybe for startup products within an existing brand, correct?
I think that's a safe bet just because
Okay.
of the sales history and sales volume. We aren't necessarily brand new seller friendly. We do have a couple of options that might work, but it might be a little bit more of a squeeze. So
Okay.
those that, at least 6 months, and we've also encountered some, this is an innovative use of funding, that have been selling in stores or on other marketplaces and come to us. They have the sales history elsewhere. We are not Amazon specific. And they use funding in order to expand to Amazon, that
Mhm.
they said now's the time, or they're selling Amazon North America and they want to go to Europe, that kind of expansion opportunity. So that ties in with the growth sellers, or more on the startup end where they've had some success and want to keep growing.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
One of the things that one of the places you can plug in sort of two ends here, the startup side, depending on sort of the size of your market, the innovative nature of a new product going on Amazon, you can look at crowdfunding platforms. Like some of them are real techy, like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, and they've almost grown up to where they're you can be too small for them now. But some smaller ones, like more traditional, they look at more traditional business ventures, like not spec ventures, but are still essentially crowdfunding platforms, are like Fundable or Crowd Supply, which will specifically, lend you money for big and heavy things needed for businesses.
So on the crowdfunding, that's more for that, because that's also like promotional marketing, like pre-sales, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of pre-sale, there's a lot of promotion. You might end up doing more promoting on the social platforms your loan than your product initially. So but yeah, you're essentially out there trying to attract what are essentially dead investors, right? They're lending you money, but they generally are attracted to the product. It's either experimental, or it's risky, or
Okay.
or it's innovative. They got their start out of the tech innovation of the late 90s and
Caroline, I'm
2000.
kind of adding to what Patrick's talking about as far as the crowdfunding. Now, I realize obviously that is potentially, a competitor for Sellers Fi on this, but it may fit in some of the areas that Sellers Fi doesn't. But I'm kind of curious what your opinion or your experience has been with maybe clients that have tried crowdfunding. Do you have any history with that?
I don't, from a like business end perspective,
Okay.
as a shopper and a marketing brain, I do see a lot of value in that kind of approach, especially for new products or
Right.
new brands. Unfortunately, with the new brands, you might need to go a little bit viral. I know that's an old term and everything, but it's the
Mhm.
opportunity, like Patrick was saying, to have that community come in, and that pre-built community when you launch. If you're launching on Amazon, you have that entire Kickstarter community ready to promote your product. That from a marketing side of things, it definitely has its value if you can get the people to rally behind. Again, we go back to the garlic press. Don't put your garlic press on Kickstarter. It's not going to work. There are a million of them in the world. But I know someone that used to do, he would invest a lot in board game Kickstarters,
Right.
new creative games. That was so fun.
Mhm.
And so there are opportunities if it's the right audience and the right product fit.
I find that some of the crowdfunding that I have sponsored, it's usually because it's some innovative thing, right? It's very unique, very like nobody else has this kind of thing. It seems to be the most popular ones that get funded the fastest, right? The more innovative, the more attention it tends to get, the faster it gets funded. But I also on the so I want it. The downside on that, of course, is the reputation of like, okay, when is this actually shipping? Is this shipping 3 months from now, a year from now? When is it? Never, there's a risk there, right? And I find that the typical pattern on that is the more complex it is. Like for instance, I've bought like AI powered, camera accessories and these kinds of things, right? And I'm like, cool, this is the greatest tech. It looks awesome and everything. And it took a year and a half before I actually got it, and it was like, is this ever going to happen? So it seems like the more complex it is maybe as technology, the longer the expectation really is in order to have to deliver that product maybe, but that probably wouldn't I guess the recommendation that I would have for brands that use crowdfunding is don't be just speculative on like, hey, I have an idea that I want to get funding in order to create and invent. More of a case of like, what, I've worked out some of the bugs. I just need to produce the thing now. And that's what I need the funding for. Don't make people wait too long because that becomes
And a
point
lot
of
of
friction.
a lot of the gating is up to the investors, right? Because they need to hit a critical mass of capital before they can start production. So if it's a slow raise, that could be bad in two ways, right? It could be bad that it's going to mean a long turnaround
It's a
for
bad signal.
investors.
Yeah,
It also might not be a good product because you
right.
can't not attracting enough capital.
Do they have institutional investors that invest on crowdfunding, or is that strictly just independent person to person?
There are angel investment groups that are all over those.
Okay. Isn't that
Particularly
you
the
use them for
bigger-
prospecting? You probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That could be good. I suppose, that's kind of where you want to refer back to the Tim Jordan discussion we had last time, of like what to look for. What are the red flags to look for? When is the deal too good to be true? Maybe it's more of a case of like go for more of the tried and true companies. Sellerfi, as an example, where it's a better, more established company. That's obviously one of the reasons we wanted to have you on, Carolyn, because we do have a certain level of trust that we don't have with some other competitors. Kind of jumping into this, so I talked to earlier as far as like startup. We've crossed into things as far as the growth stage for brands, and I'm kind of curious, like, you got startup, you got growth, you got more established brands, and different life cycles within those brands and within the products. And maybe, a lot of it is based off of, hey, I have an opportunity to do X, fulfill a Costco order, for instance, a one-off order. I've got the opportunity to expand out into Temu or Walmart or some other, sales channel, some other marketplace, for instance. Would you recommend, I kind of want to get your perspective as far as like how things change with funding in your experience, Carolyn. It's when it comes to the difference between startup growth and established Amazon sellers as far as the kind of funding. Actually, let me just ask that question. I'll come back to the other one I had later. What do you see as far as, kind of reiterate here, what do you think the biggest differences is in your client base, in your experience, the difference as far as the need for funding and the scale or the type of funding that you have to provide based off of the stage that the Amazon seller is in?
Sure. I'd say one of the biggest differences as a company is growing is the creativity and usage of funds. Across the board, people are going to need inventory, and we do run into that a lot. It's one of the most popular uses of our funding, as well as funding across the industry.
Yeah.
But as a company is growing, they get to be a little bit more creative and do different things with the money coming in. When you're just getting started, you're focusing on inventory, you're focusing on marketing, you need to get your product and your brand out there. That's pretty much where you are. But as you're growing, you have the opportunity to use someone else's money to grow your business instead of tying it to your personal credit cards and taking out personal loans. You can start taking out business loans and start paying yourself back. But it is the opportunity to be more creative in what you're doing forward. It
Right.
might give you the chance between, scaling and established to have your own warehouse and get out of FBA and get out of your 3PL and just start fulfilling your own orders to keep everything in house. It might be the opportunity to start an influencer campaign and to try different things to see what else works for your business to help you go to the next level. Because if you're
Right.
doing the same thing over and over and over, you're not going to be that growing, scaling brand.
Do you keep tabs on or maybe just take interest in how the money is actually used by a brand?
It's a great
Or is it
question.
more of a case of,
It's a decision on their end, and it's conversations that occur between account managers. When people register, you get a dedicated account manager along the journey. So if you say, I have a Costco order I need to fill, let me go talk to Alfredo.
okay,
Or I need to get XYZ, I'll talk to Kati. And so those kinds of conversations are happening behind the scenes.
so it's not, I mean, I think I know we certainly talked about in the last webinar with Haley Burton and Tim Jordan, and some of those were where the advice was when you do get funding to be very, very frugal with it, very
Mhm.
intentional, very focused about how every single dollar is spent.
Mhm.
Unlike anything you've ever done before, if you've gotten a pile of cash, because the temptation is too great to say like, oh, well, this is one exception, I'll make it back, or I'll just transfer over here. It's easy to get trapped simply
Mhm.
just out of mismanagement of those funds. I did. There were some interesting stories from that last webinar, frankly, as far as like what people did. That Porsche example that I was joking about was actually, I think, I don't know if it was a Porsche or if it was something else, but it was somebody actually used that where they took the funny and they said like, well, let me buy a car. It's like, no, that's not what it's for.
Right. And
You
that, yeah, it's business use cases.
yeah.
So definitely keep it to
I think
business.
I
Have
think
you
one of the
seen?
interesting uses of leverage like that, growth capital, is what Caroline pointed to before. Taking a successful Amazon business, leveraging that to move to a Walmart, to move to a TikTok shop or
Right.
something like that. I think that's a smart use of that capital that doesn't necessarily keep that money in-house in Amazon or in that Amazon business, but sort of broadens your platform availability, decentralizes your risk that you might have. Everybody who owns an Amazon business knows the risk of relying solely on Amazon. So,
Yeah.
and then I think on the other side, when you get to you're established and you get to wanting to finance that Costco buy or that wholesale opportunity that drops in your lap or something like that. What established companies can do that some of the smaller guys can't is set up a revolving line of credit. So it's there. Generally, they're sort of like big boy credit cards in that you don't have to carry a balance. They're not going to drop a big pile of money the day you sign. There's going to be like an origination fee. There might be an annual fee, whether you use it or not, but it's there for your utilization when these opportunities arise. So if you've been in business for a while, you're established, and you've had a couple of these come across your threshold, it's probably a good idea to start, like Caroline said, have it ready before the opportunity or the emergency comes up, right? It might be a hole in the roof of your warehouse that you need the money for, to save your inventory, not necessarily, something positive, but setting up a revolving line of credit when you're worthy of one is a great idea. And if you don't need the money, they're not crazy expensive.
Right.
And you'll go through that sort of qualifying for finance process before it's an emergency or before you need it by Tuesday.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's unfortunately, I mean, I've run into that too many times on my own where I had stumbled across something that really worked well in order to move inventory fast. And unfortunately, it might like, oh wait, I've only got 200 units, but for some reason, I connected. Oh, let me go ahead and really promote this one product that I only have 200 units, and then it works. Now what do I do? Because the what is it? The kiss of death is to run out of stock, on Amazon, because
especially early, especially because it's popular.
Yeah, because Amazon absolutely, you take a beating on it when it comes to the marketing standpoint. I know certainly from the agency standpoint, we run into that periodically where a brand is a little bit a little too casual as far as like running out of stock, and they think that nothing's going to change. They just, we'll just get more stock in and then we'll be right back up there again. And unfortunately, Amazon has a certain amount of penalty there. So don't do that. Don't run out of stock on something that moves.
Right.
So, but sometimes
there's also like 1 billion people looking at Amazon to figure out what's working, right? And so
yes, that is,
there's people watching that. They're watching you be successful, and they'll fill the void.
Yeah, I'm running into that more. I'm seeing that more where in my line, I'm connected well enough in the industry is that I get to see like, hey, this is working really well right now. It's like, you should try it. It's like, yeah, of course I'm going to. But sometimes that I'm like, oh wait, I don't have the cash in order to restock this. I need it on Tuesday. It's like, that's not going to happen. Logistically, it's not going to happen. But sometimes it's, I like kind of calling back to your earlier idea, Carolyn, is that the plan ahead. Look into it before you need it, because chances are you're not ready to even apply for it yet, because you don't know what you don't know. And that kind of leads into the conversation of what are your suggestions in order to improve? I do want to ask, as far as like what some of the differentiators are you think that SellerSfi has over maybe competitors or other options. I'd love to hear that from you as well, but kind of give me some advice, like talking to me is like what are my best chances? What are some ways that I can get best prepared in order to improve my chances of getting approved?
Also a great question. And I'm rewinding just a little bit and then I'll come back to that, because I also want to caution everyone, don't take more than you need, to the point of living frugally and finding a partner before you need it. Chances are, if you're approved for 100K, but in your head, your order is only 80K, take the 80K. You don't need that extra 20K. Don't carry that debt. Take what you need. Don't take more. That's when people get into really dangerous territory. Yeah. But for being qualified and what you can best do, continue those sales. We are looking for some liquidity. What's left at the end of the month? What do you have? Because if you're taking out a 50K loan and you've got $12 in the bank, that's not going to do it. So it's the option to look at this sounds really overwhelming, but to look at your entire business. Where can you cut back a little bit? Are you spending, too much on ads? Are your profit margins not high enough? If you change your price by 50 cents, does that make all the difference in the world? Do you see your sales decline, or are you still selling at that steady rate and you get 50 cents more per product in your pocket? So it's that option to look at your business and kind of stay lean and keep things moving.
Right. Here's I'm going to inject this. It's a bit self-serving, but I think it's important to point out is that you're referring to like as far as like where can you get more lean in your business, where can you pull out some more profitability, where can you cut back on expenses, these kind of things. If you're working with a service provider like Canopy Management as an example, do not be afraid to pose that question to whoever your representative or team is, because like in Canopy's case, like you have a whole lot of smart people in the company that can come together quickly in order to help you solve a challenge that you have, or to get to a goal that you have. Don't just assume it's like, well, my hands are tied, I can't do anything. Tap into the resources that you're currently working with to say, how do I solve this? How can I do better? Because I've got this thing coming up. Help me get there. Don't simply just not have that conversation, because you're leaving money on the table, literally.
Right. I'd also say that running a leaner business doesn't mean removing all of those experts from your account.
No.
Because as you're growing, you're going to need that expertise within your business. So pull in Canopy, pull in an ads manager, because it might be that investment of hiring them saves you thousands in the ads that you're running every month. And so it sounds counterintuitive to invest in these partners, but chances are they know that part of your business a little bit better, and they can help you as well.
Yeah, I see too many times too where a brand will either just kind of throw money, whether it's advertising dollars or design services or external, Google ads, or whatever the case is, in order to continue to push a set of products within their catalog that don't really have enough conversion rate to justify the amount of money they're putting into it. I know part of our own process at Canopy is to look at what is the net profit that you can pull out of each product. And sometimes the recommendation, and please be open to those recommendations, because our perspective is very wide compared to maybe what you've seen, right? But as a business owner, you've got to make a decision of, okay, yes, I agree. You know what, as much as I want this, this surplus inventory, or these other products that really didn't launch well, as much as I want those to succeed, I need to have my money over here, because this is a much faster opportunity in order to make money. It has a much higher profit margin because because of everything that I've learned about my other products so far. And so when you are looking at not only a combination of funding as well as what your cash flow is and your ROI, is you've got to, even if it's temporary, be willing to make some hard decisions to say, you know what, I'm going to pull back on any ad spend or any promotions or any kind of additional spending that I have on these products that are underperforming within my catalog, and refocus all those expenses into what is going to give us the highest ROI. And sometimes what you'll find is, you know what, I'm glad that I did that. I've seen this a lot of times too, is that, okay, I'm glad that I refocused, instead of pointing at 80%, my ad budget to 80% of my catalog, and focusing it at 20%, 10%, 5% of my catalog, because those are the ones that they don't have to be the top sellers, but they're the ones that have the highest ROI, because they've got very high margins, they've got very high conversion rates, and that combination you want to shove money into all day long, because you're going to get more dollars back. And if you're working, whether it's your internal team, whether you're working with a consultant or an agency, ask the question, where should the money be spent that is going to produce the highest profit? What products have the conversion rate, have the margin to justify the amount of money that I'm putting into it? Ask that question so that you know ahead of time, where can I streamline? Where can I get additional profitability, so that when you have that conversation with Carolyn, that you're in a much better position to scale your brand, because you've gotten more lean.
The old saying is, smart money goes where it's treated best, right? So you have to look at your catalog as an investor might, and say, okay, this is where I can leverage my pile of money best.
Right.
And your mistakes just because they're yours doesn't mean they're not mistakes, right? So if they're in there, you can make more money selling a lot of product A to make up for the mistake that was product B. Your money is better spent there than trying to promote something that didn't sell.
Yeah. Because if you don't treat the money well, then it's going to go somewhere else.
It'll go somewhere else.
I used to run an annual conference for Amazon sellers, and one of our speakers at the conference did a session essentially on removing emotion from your business. Because of course you're going to be emotionally invested in the products that you're bringing in and the decisions that you've made. But to this point, it might have been your first product and you might be proud of it, but it might not be where the money is anymore.
Yeah.
So take a step back, remove the emotion, and that's where it's helpful to have that conversation with Canopy or whoever you're working with, because they don't have that emotion. They're going to look at the numbers and they're going to say, this is what we think.
Yeah. I've seen, in my heart, I always look at it, it's like, I don't believe in dead products, but that's a general opinion, in that most products are not properly differentiated and marketed to the target audience. They just kind of phone it in and say like, well, I'm doing what everybody else is doing. It's like, yeah, that's why you're losing. So I usually think is that there's usually oftentimes the product is the problem. And is the presentation of that product is the problem, on Amazon, for instance. Now, once in a while, yeah, it's like, okay, that's just a garbage product that has just gotten shot down because of bad reviews and bad quality, and just like should never have been even, sold. It should have been pulled immediately as soon as it, it was evident that it's like, this is a serious product problem. But
one of the advantages of going to a crowdfunder, right? You're sort of allowing them to choose to quote invest in in lending to your company. And so
that's okay.
If you have trouble raising money for a product, it might be the product.
Well, that's a really good point, because you figure is that if you can't sell it through crowdfunding, it's because your marketing message is wrong. And so if your marketing message is wrong there, it's going to be wrong when you finally launch the product too.
Yep.
So that is probably a great way. It's that whole idea of pre-selling a product. It's not just a proof of concept that the product can sell, but it's also, how good is your marketing? How good did you differentiate your product from competition?
What does smart money think of your product?
Right, exactly.
It's a nice A/B test if you have two ideas.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up this session, do either of you have, or what do either of you have to add on that maybe we didn't ask?
I got nothing.
That was so thorough.
You were so.
I feel like we've covered a lot today.
Carolyn, how do people reach you?
Sure. So you can contact me directly. I am just Caroline at sellersfi.com, or you can head to our website, which is sellersfi.com. We've talked about quite a few case studies, and we have a lot of success stories on our website that use names and use data and use all of that, of course, with the company's permission. So you can see real life use cases of our different funding methods. And learn more. And if you have any questions along the way, I am happy to help.
Okay. Now, and I know with Patrick, I believe the best way that people reach you is to pay the greens fees for your next golfing outage.
This is true.
In Florida.
It is. I'm only 48 hours from my next tee time at all times.
Is there a way that you want people to reach you?
I can be reached Patrick at canopymanagement.com. We're, like I said, we're full service, so I can direct you to any of the sort of areas of expertise that we have in-house. And definitely if you're looking to, invest capital that SellersFi provides you seriously and maximize your growth potential, professional ads management is step 2.
Yeah. Awesome. And then if you want to reach me, of course, I'm at brian@canopymanagement.com, or just simply go out and talk to our team at canopymanagement.com. Caroline, thank you for joining us. Patrick, thank you for joining us here. Probably one of the biggest things that if I were to pull one takeaway from this is start the conversation well ahead of when you actually think you might need funding, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And timing and paperwork is often going to be the bottleneck that's going to throw you off. So
Right.
get ahead of it.
Best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the second best time is tomorrow.
No, today. No, I'm sorry. Golfing today, plant the tree tomorrow.
Yeah, I have a 3 o'clock tea time, so I'll have to wait till tomorrow.
Of course. Awesome. Thanks. Thank you both.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. And
Thank
don't forget to
you.
check out that last webinar we had with Tim Jordan and Haley Burt. That talked more about some of the dangers and some of the examples that history has shown us about what not to do. So yes. So thank you both.
Thanks.
Bye all.